Hi, everyone. This is Jason Bjork of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. I actually had her on years ago. She wrote my favorite entrepreneurship book. I recommend it to everyone. I've read a lot of entrepreneurship books, and this one is the best by far. It is not unicorns and rainbows. It is a balanced entrepreneurship book about the pros and cons of entrepreneurship and how difficult it is. She is a former investment banker who did over $1 billion worth of deals in her career and a best-selling author of 2 business books. The first book is The Entrepreneur Equation, evaluating the realities, risks, and rewards of having your own business. And her newest book, which I think came out last year and is available on Audible audiobook as well, The War on Small Business, How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. Carol Roth, thank you for joining me again.
Yes, so great to be back with you. And I have to say, right back at you, you've been producing some tremendous content, and it's so nice to see you over the years grow and just, have such an important part in the dialogue. So kudos to you.
I really appreciate that. We're almost 10 million views on YouTube and almost to 50,000 subscribers. It's been an uphill battle, though.
It always will, as you learned in the entrepreneur equation, right? If it was easy, then everybody would do it.
Exactly. And most people quit when the going gets tough.
Exactly.
Okay, so first question here, probably have the answer in your latest book. Do you think that governments tried to intentionally hurt small business with its policies the last 2 years and help big businesses like Amazon, Walmart, Target, large grocery store chains, and big box retailers?
So the word intention is always an interesting one because, there's the intention in, it's a nefarious plot and we just hate small business. And there's the intention in, hey, we like power and it's much easier for us to deal with the big guys than it is with the smaller guys. And then, of course, there's just, incompetence and the things that come out of, kind of large systems, so to speak. So I tend to fall in the camp of the second one on the list. Like, yes, it is intentional. Not that they necessarily want to hurt small business. They just fundamentally do not care. They do not suit, any purpose in terms of the government consolidating power. And so they're sort of easy cannon fodder for whatever they need. And so I think if you look at what's been done to small business, prior to the COVID mandates, but certainly over the last couple of years, like if you're trying to actively crush small business, there's not much that you would have done differently. And, I think that if you look at all the different things that they did, that were not based on data and science, but were based on political clout and connections, which certainly benefited the big companies in multiple ways over that of their smaller competitors. It's pretty easy to make that argument. Now, not to say that incompetence and being part of a big system, isn't part of that as well, but I think it's pretty hard to say that there isn't some level of intention that works in this sort of big business, big government, and big special interests unholy triumvirate.
So over the last 2 years, then, what should governments have done differently to help small businesses navigate through the pandemic?
Well, the very first thing they should have done is left them alone and not shut them down by mandate. I did a piece, when all of this came up very early in March of 2020, because I saw the writing on the wall and I went, oh, yeah, this is going to go very badly. And so, really, in general, I think that they should have just left everybody alone to their own devices. They could have spent maybe a couple of weeks trying to figure this out, but they were never going to shut down a virus. And we have now proven that out over a couple of years, with all kinds of bad things happening in the wake of proving that. But many of us knew that to begin with. If they felt they had to do something, and it was going to be small businesses that bore the brunt of that, then what I've argued is, and other people have argued this before me as well, is that, this should have been treated like eminent domain, and that you have to properly compensate these small businesses for shutting them down. And I'm sure somebody now is yelling at me going, PPP, PPP. No, PPP was a joke. It was structured very poorly, and it certainly didn't give small businesses nearly the amount of resources they did as a percentage of overall relief, or for taking and subjugating their property rights. So they could have taken money. They could have said, okay, we're giving it to the small businesses. We want you to keep people on the payroll so that they are still employed. They're still paying into Social Security. We're just going to pay them to stay home for a couple weeks while we sort this out. And then you can bring them back as employees. And that would have, saved us the shifts that we saw in the labor force. It would have changed the dynamics altogether. So that would have been one way around it. But, what they did, in a sense, is very clever, is that they kept the big businesses open. So they were getting all of the extra revenues that now weren't going to the small businesses. You had the Fed come in with unprecedented intervention. So now you were getting multiple expansion if you were a publicly traded company. And so the big businesses were doing great. They loved the fact that, these small businesses were shutting down. It was this epic historic wealth transfer from Main Street to Wall Street. But if they shared in the pain, if there had been a full shutdown, if we had not supported the markets, if Walmart had to close and Amazon's warehouses had to close, like this would not have lasted 15 days to slow the spread. And unfortunately, because they did this whole, you're essential and you're not essential thing, those without clout are the ones who ended up getting clobbered.
And they've created permanent distortions with the Fed's policy, with taxes, with rules, regulations, red tape. And then that's on top of the supply chain problems. The supply chain, here we are over 2 years later since the pandemic started. The supply chains, I've spoken to a lot of small business owners who listen to this podcast, and then also our patrons, our small business owners as well. The supply chain problems in some cases are even worse than they were a year ago.
Yeah, because you have the supply chain problems that begot inflation. When you have a supply constrained economy and you throw a bunch of dollars in it, as you well know, Jason, that's going to cause epic inflation, particularly given the number of dollars that they threw at it. So whatever problems that they created via the shutdown, they just exacerbated with all of their policy, whether it be monetary policy, fiscal policy, or just stupid government policy. And that has been just a continual fight, whether, at first it was for labor, from the distortions in the labor market that was created and the undersupply of labor, to the, just battling inflation and trying to get goods and service or components of their services at any prices, but now at these incredibly inflated prices. So it's just been, one thing after another that the backbone of our countries had to deal with. And, again, I think that a lot of people don't understand the scope of what it means, for small business. They're called the backbone because they're very substantial. They're 99.9% of all the business entities. And before COVID, they were about half the GDP and about half the labor force, and certainly the biggest hirer pre-COVID. And so that's all been upended. And it's just been such a battle for, a group of people who are just trying to participate in the same kind of wealth creation and economic freedom opportunities that are afforded, but with the scales being tipped towards the big guys.
So correct me if I'm wrong, don't small businesses here in the United States, they create the majority of new jobs? I think it's around 70%, the last statistics. I think that might have been before the pandemic, though.
Yes.
And don't small businesses also pay the majority of the taxes? Because a lot of corporations, they pay taxes on a lot of different things, but a lot of corporations also don't pay income taxes because they hire lobbyists here in DC to make sure they don't pay corporate income taxes, the large ones anyway.
Yeah. So, and especially if you think about the structure of taxes, even just the corporate tax rate versus the personal tax rate, there's all kinds of ways, as a corporation that you can get those taxes whittled down. Most of the entities that small businesses own are pass-through entities. So that ends up getting taxed at a personal rate. So you can just, from that and it being the majority of the entities, extrapolate what that means in terms of the tax burden.
There's a hypothetical question. If you were in charge, how can this mess with small business having supply chain problems, stagflation, too much taxes be fixed? Would tax cuts for small businesses, some type of rebate or something like that, would that help rather than the PPP loans, which are a mess?
So are we talking about today, or are we talking about like back in the day? Like where are we going with this hypothetical?
Well, maybe both if you think either would help. But I mean, unfortunately, I think the politicians here in DC are only going to make things worse.
Yeah, I mean that's really, I mean, the best thing for small business just in general is for government to stay out of the way. If you think about all of the things that small businesses need to contend with, it's usually on the back of some sort of onerous and costly government regulation. So, the fact of the matter is, and a lot of this, by the way, is at the state and local level. It isn't at the federal level. But, all of the red tape and the permits and the insurance costs and all these kinds of things that, small businesses have to navigate, which is just insane. I can tell you, I'm in Illinois. Yes, you can laugh about that, but I've got family here. So I pay the stupid family tax. But, I'm in Illinois, and my employee works from home on a computer, yet I still need to pay workers' comp insurance for that. And there's like thousands of dollars of just stupid things like that over and over again that could be going towards my employees and towards building the business. And a bunch of time. I have a small business community. I did a survey a couple of years ago, and it was something like 40% of their time was spent on sort of administrative and non-productive activities. So if you really wanted to help small business, you would remove all that. You would make it easier for them to hire the first employee. You would get rid of a lot of the stringent regulations around what's a gig employee versus what's an actual employee. You would just make it easier for them to succeed. And all that we've seen is just movement in the other direction. And even on the tax, front, the fact that there is this unevenness between small businesses and traditional corporate structures. Yes, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act helped most small businesses. It helped most taxpayers pay less, but it didn't help the traditional small business as much as it did the big businesses. And again, that's just not apples to apples fair. So getting the government out of the way would be the number one thing that I hear from small business owners. And the fewer barriers, the less red tape, the better it is for small business.
And small business owners, they're not able, as you pointed out earlier in the interview, able to deal with this higher regulatory burden, with this higher cost structure, because if you're a small business owner, it's a lot harder to grow your revenue and then offset the costs. Whereas if you're a large business, you can amortize these higher costs over more goods and services or over more customers.
Absolutely. And even just the rationalization of your business, we're seeing things now like, obviously crime in big cities that are causing big chains to shut down certain units, or, hey, we're having a labor issue here. And so, we're going to move, something from one piece of our business to another. If you have a small business, if you have a location, it may just be one location, like you're stuck. It either works or it doesn't. And so all of these additional burdens, really create extra leverage. I think the other thing, which is just for all of our economic security, but again, impacting small businesses even more than the bigger businesses that have more room to absorb it, is this ridiculous energy policy that we have. And obviously that is impacting everything. It impacts employees and the cost of them getting to work. It impacts the cost of goods and services and getting to the small business. It impacts the cost of food. It impacts everything in our lives. And so to the extent that we don't have a commitment to long-term, energy security, that's going to be very, very difficult for everyone to navigate. But again, particularly the smaller businesses that have less latitude to do so.
And the next shoe to drop, and you're already starting to see anecdotal evidence of this here in the United States, it's already happened in the European Union and Asia and the United Kingdom a lot, is the electricity bills. So if you're you're doing manufacturing, the natural gas price here in the United States is up a lot. The US is exporting more liquefied natural gas. That's going to be a much higher electricity cost for a lot of these small businesses starting now, and electricity prices may double in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I saw a statistic today that 60% of the electricity in the US today is powered by either natural gas or coal. So that's where we stand today. And by the way, if you live in the New England area, it's even higher, over there. So, the idea that we can just pretend that we have all of these substitutes to make up the difference is ridiculous. And, we're going to be paying the price quite literally for that.
And you're also, over the next couple of years, you're seeing governments at the state and local level. I think also they're talking about this at the federal level. They want to force wages higher and the new excuse is because of inflation, but there were already wage increases that were planned prior to the pandemic and prior to all this inflation. So the voices to raise wages for a lot of these small business owners will only keep increasing. And that's additional cost that's going to hurt profit margins for these small businesses, as well as much higher labor costs.
Yeah, I mean, the labor market's a complete disaster. I mean, we have supply demand imbalances in just about every facet of our economy. We have it in labor, we have it in housing, we have it in food, we have it in energy, and we have it in other commodities. But on the labor front, we were in a sort of tough position as it was, with somewhat of a mismatch of skills already happening before these stupid policies came on board. But what the stupid policies did was it exacerbated all of these people leaving the workforce. So we had 3 million retirees who dropped out early. We had 2 million legal immigrants that would have been brought in, based on the trajectory we were on if the policies hadn't shifted. And then we had a whole bunch of people who just became disenfranchised, whether it was, hey, we're not sure what the government is going to do. And I don't know if my kid's going to have school. And so I can't go back into the workforce until I know that they're taken care of, to people who are just like, I'm getting checks and I don't care. And now I'm, trading crypto and, I've dropped out and whatnot. So all of these things exacerbating the supply demand imbalance. And, yes, inflation probably brings some of those retirees back out of retirement, and, we see some shifts, but this is going to be a long-term structural issue, which means the market is going to be pushing up wages, certainly as we have seen, not to match inflation. So people are still losing net, but that is creating additional pressure. And, again, the smaller businesses that don't have other places that they can rationalize from in their business, they don't have somebody in, accounting they can let go, or, some other thing that they were planning, that goes into marketing that they can delay. That's going to be much easier for them to absorb than it is for the small businesses. And so, I've really been calling this period the Great Consolidation, because we're just seeing more power go to the half of the economy that's concentrated in the hands of 20,000+ big businesses, as well as the government. And, just more and more burdens for the other half of the economy that's in the hands of 32.6 or so million small business owners.
And capital is still cheap for large corporations, despite the interest rates going up. Large corporations can still borrow cheap relative to a lot of other entities. So if wages are forced higher, you're going to see McDonald's and many of these other restaurants and retail stores, they're not going to have human employees. They're just going to start automating, or they're going to move more of their businesses online. So that's going to be even less jobs available for a lot of people.
Yeah, we're already seeing that. My favorite McDonald's that I grew up with, I went there the other day. I didn't recognize it. I mean, there was like barely a soul in there. They had gotten rid of the party room, which made me sad, because I used to like to go to birthday parties there when I was younger. And it was all of these kiosks that you just kind of walk up to and you type in your order, and like eventually it gets to you. And it's definitely going to accelerate, the movement away from jobs. And if you're a smaller restaurant, like, you just can't make that level of capital investment, because again, you're buying for maybe 1 unit or 2 units, not tens of thousands of units.
Yeah, and the borrowing cost too. So it's cost of capital, and then they can't amortize it over that many goods too. So
exactly.
But do you think then that all this stuff with the supply chain problems, bad policies from governments, the high energy prices, does this mean that globalization is basically over and there's going to be a lot less, and supply chains are going to relocalize eventually?
So there are a lot of factors that I'm deeply researching right now, just leave you with that hint, that sort of are leading us on this path of a new financial world order. And there are a couple of different ways that that could look, but there is a very strong case that is made for kind of, like you said, these blocs, that kind of maybe China and Russia, and maybe even Japan end up, in a bloc, or maybe it's a brick bloc. And then, there's a European bloc that may or may not align with, the Americas, but there's definitely more of a, I don't know if balkanization is the right word, but these kind of more localized pseudo, global blocks that happen versus grand globalization. And I think that's going to be a huge wake up call, because there are the people who think that, all of a sudden we're going to be able to reshore all of that manufacturing to the US at the same time, when you've got the cost structure and the calls for more union labor and more expensive labor. Like I just, they're just not sort of, they're very decoupled from reality. I'll just say that. So, they only look at one thing, and they don't kind of look at how that runs through the big picture. So I'm, not to say that we won't get some manufacturing back. And I think that some folks have said that, but it's going to be for, higher end products. It's not going to be, the level of manufacturing that I think a lot of people have come to associate with overseas manufacturing.
This global supply chain, where a lot of cheap things are made in China and then they're shipped here in container ships, you have to have cheap energy inputs. So you have to have cheap diesel, you have to have cheap plastic costs. If energy prices are through the roof, if electricity costs and manufacturing costs in China are up 5x or 10x in 2 years, that model is going to break down, especially with politicians, rules, regulations, blocking supply chains. I'm not sure if you've seen any of the presentations that Peter Zeihan has given. He's predicting that a lot of the cheaper manufacturing will actually end up in Mexico because of NAFTA. So the US will be importing more from Mexico. A lot of the factories that were in China will end up in Mexico then.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I know some folks who are looking at that today, and certainly, like you said, with NAFTA and the geography and the overall costs, it is a better solution. I mean, we've seen in certain industries, some pretty big investments over the last couple of years, whether it be in medical devices or, the Mattels of the world. So I think that is a prediction that makes a lot of sense.
So how can a business owner survive and thrive in an environment where there is bad stagflation, taxes may be increasing, there are immense supply chain problems, and way too many rules, regulations, red tape from all different levels of government?
Lord, it's hard. My heart goes out to every small business owner, and certainly not every small business owner contends with this in the same way, but there are many that do. I think one of the things that is a competitive advantage for small businesses really is their customer base and their relationships. And most people want to help small businesses, and they want their small business relationships to thrive and to survive. So I think it's really imperative to be communicating on a regular basis with your customers and say, look, we're not making excuses. We're just telling you what's going on, and here's how you can help us. And if whether that's getting them to introduce more potential customers, whether it's buying gift certificates to help with cash flow, whatever it is that is going to help you. Maybe it's just being patient. Hey, yeah, we know that our hamburger is going to take 20 minutes to get to your table instead of 10 because we only have 3 people working in the kitchen, and we know it costs more, and that's not the best thing, but here's what we're contending with. I think having that open communication will help a lot of businesses get through the rough patch, and certainly collaborating with other small businesses to the best that you can, whether it's, to get purchasing discounts, whether it's to cross promote, share best practices. This is a time when community is just an underappreciated resource. And I think that small businesses are going to need to do that. I would also say, to the extent that you have any vendors where you can lock in pricing. And again, you have to make sure your vendor is solid and will still be there. But that you can lock in pricing in this, in an inflationary environment, that would be to your benefit as well.
Are there any types of businesses, maybe an online business that sells like an information product or some type of good and service, where you think will do better than other types of businesses in this type of environment that's so difficult to navigate, as we've highlighted in the last 20 something minutes?
Yeah, I certainly think to the extent that you can go after more high-end customers, that is going to be helpful, because certainly as the environment worsens and the individual financial position of customers worsen, to the extent that you have, if you're B2B, bigger business customers that you can help rely on. And, if you're B2C, wealthier individuals and more luxury types of products, because those are the ones that aren't going to have to make as many of the same substitution decisions as the people who are really, really struggling. And not to say that you should abandon your customers, because you should not, but just to make sure that you're fortifying your own business, or if you have the luxury of deciding what business that you're going to be in. I do think that having the people who are in the better financial position as a customer are going to be critical. And anything you can do now to fortify your balance sheet and to really cut down expenses and to have sort of a 18 to 24 month plan and runway, that's going to be very helpful.
And if there is deflation, you want some cash and you don't want too much debt, because you don't know what's going to happen with the amount of revenues. People are seeing inflation, and a lot of people think that with inflation, that means, my debt will be inflated away. Well, if you're a small business owner, that's not necessarily guaranteed. Right. You're not a large bank or a hedge fund or a corporation. There's not a guaranteed bailout coming from the U.S. federal government or the Federal Reserve Bank.
Yeah, there's that great saying that if you owe the government $10,000, or if you owe the bank $10,000, it's your problem. But if you owe the bank, $10 million, it's their problem, something like that. The more money you owe them, the bigger the problem it is for them. And, those are the people, unfortunately, that are deemed too big to fail. And that never trickles down, unfortunately, to the backbone of this country, whether it's, the businesses or the people of Main Street.
So I know you've been helping entrepreneurs for a very long time, Carol. I have a personal finance question. Sure. What are ways that people can maintain their standard of living or grow their incomes to offset the stagflation that governments and central banks have created? And would you say that entrepreneurship is viable for most people?
A lot of questions there. So, so one of the things that, while we still have a supply-demand imbalance in the workforce, to the extent that you can grab equity from anywhere, whether it's in your own business, whether it's from some sort of partnership, or if you're going to work for a company, particularly if it's a public company while their stock prices are depressed, and you can participate in the upside of the value that you are creating. That's how you create wealth, is by ownership of assets that increase in value. And so that always has to be the mindset. And if you're willing to delay gratification, maybe you do a staycation instead of taking a vacation. Or, if you're just starting out, when I was just starting out, my bedside table was a cardboard box with a sheet over it until I got myself in a financial position and well enough invested that I had more flexibility. But if you're willing to delay gratification and, invest in things that have the ability to appreciate and value, like that is the way to create wealth. So it's homes, it's lands, it's other people's businesses. It may be your own business. Is entrepreneurship viable? Sure. Entrepreneurship's always viable. You just have to know the game you're playing and know that it's more challenging. And have to make the appropriate provisions for that. But if you are well servicing somebody's need or want, There's always going to be an opportunity to that as long as we have any sort of protection of property rights. But it isn't for everybody. And it's okay if it's not for you, because there are really great people who are entrepreneurial inside organizations. And there are also people who are just really great at execution. And so just seeing if there's a way, if you're going to bring something to the table that you can also participate in the upside, it doesn't have to be your business for you to get some ownership of that business. And now is the time. And by the way, this is going to change. So do it now, like go renegotiate, get that equity now, because you may not have that opportunity 6 months from now.
And your first book highlights a lot of the risks. So it's a balanced book, because I've read dozens of entrepreneurship books and almost all of them are unicorns and rainbows, all the upside. They don't talk about the burnout, the depression, all the ups and downs, the emotional roller coaster of like sending pitch decks to people and getting all these meetings. And it sounds like you're very close to investment. And then there's a vote and then you lose the vote. And then like your business partner is not what they thought, what you thought they were. All these things just go wrong.
It's hard. Like I think this is where we started. Like it is hard. It's not an easy thing. If you're going to bother doing it, you might as well go big, because I would contend it's just as hard to build something big as it is to build something small. Sometimes it's actually harder to build something small than something big. But yeah, you got to have the mindset that you're going to persevere and you're going to pivot and you're not going to take it personally and you're willing to run through the wall. You have to know if it's right for you. And that's why I wrote the book. I mean, it's called the motivational book on entrepreneurship for a reason. And there was a lot of pushback when I first wanted to publish it. You're going to crush people's dreams, and it's like, well, if I'm, I'd rather crush their dreams before they take their entire 401k out, and waste it than go, sorry, I wish I didn't want to crush your dreams, but sorry your 6 figures is missing now.
There's entire TV shows like Bar Rescue and The Restaurant Impossible about people who wanted to own something, right? They wanted to own a bar or restaurant. Right. They had no experience. They didn't have the right business partners. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know how to cook, and they wasted their entire savings. They were over $100,000 in debt. So it's important, and they could have avoided a lot of those risks beforehand. I was reading the Amazon reviews many years ago. I mean, they were negative first, and then I started bringing more attention to the book and saying, no, the people who wrote the negative reviews, they didn't read your book.
No, or they were in tech, and it's like this is not meant for like a tech, unicorn startup. This is meant for like the 99.9% of all other small businesses out there. And yes, I mean, I opened the door for the bar rescues and those makeover shows, because up until the time that I was willing to put it out there and they were able to see that there was success in having a reality check, that wasn't something that people were willing to do with small businesses. And I don't think that's kind. I think being realistic, I'm still very encouraging of entrepreneurs. I just want people to be realistic about it going in, because if you're not, you're going to get demoralized very quickly.
Well, also the mistakes are very expensive. Very expensive.
They are. And by the way, money doesn't fix a bad business model either.
Unless you're the Federal Reserve Bank or you're Silicon Valley and you're just throwing it at. But I mean, that's going to go away too, although the Fed's going to be the last one to go away, unfortunately.
Ain't that the truth? But I'm working on it. I'm doing what I can to lobby and to create awareness, to bring more people who are willing to go march on Washington to get rid of the Fed's powers.
Yeah, I have to give you credit on your Twitter. You are criticizing the Federal Reserve Bank heavily, although I think if you're still working on Wall Street, an investment bank, I think they would be threatening to fire you.
Well, the good news is when I was working in investment banking, first I worked in San Francisco, not Wall Street, but I worked in corporate finance. We were the ones that were raising capital. And when I tell you, nobody thought about the Fed. This is the mid 90s. Like the Fed wasn't something that you watched. It really wasn't until, with a couple of blips along the way, it wasn't until the Great Recession financial crisis that Fed central banking policy, really went completely wacko and became the thing that drove the markets instead of market forces. So it's very odd. Like, I have to talk to people about things I did early in my investment banking career that are just, not even relevant now. We used to do accretion dilution analysis. Oh, should I buy back stock or pay down debt? Well, it's because debt used to have a cost associated with it. Now, you don't even have to run the analysis. You know what the answer is. So it's a very different time.
And a lot of investment bankers nowadays are doing more hedge fund level trades than actual like helping businesses. I mean, they do some of that still, but they're not doing at a regular bank, a large bank like a JP Morgan, Bank of America. I mean, they're doing a ton of leveraged bond trades, leveraged currency trades, leveraged derivative trades. They're not doing as much normal banking and loans for small business because small business owners have to. And I've just heard horror stories. I mean, you have to put your house on the line as collateral to get a small business loan here in the United States. It's just ridiculous.
That's one of the reasons why I became an advocate, because I used to get calls as an investment banker from small businesses that were desperate for good advice and they just couldn't afford to pay for good advice. So that, that's part of what brought me into that fold. So understood.
So, Carol, I want to thank you so much for your time today. If my listeners want to take a look at your books, buy them on audiobook, how do they do so?
Yes. So the best thing I advocate is if you can get to your local small business bookseller, that's the best way to do it because, the majority of your dollar is going to stay in your local community. If not, there is a site online called bookshop.org that will fulfill from a local small business bookseller. And if you want to buy at one of the big guys, which all carry my stuff, it's a free market. It's, capitalism. You can vote with your dollars where you want to do it. But I do encourage people to be thoughtful about it because if you're not willing to support your small business, who is going to do that?
Well, I bought your books on Audible audiobooks, so but I don't think the audiobooks were for sale at local stores. So it was just easier just to download it on Audible. But
Understood.
I do try to buy small business on local when I can, especially from restaurants and stuff like that. I don't really like a lot of the large chains anymore. I avoid those.
Understood. But again, thanks for having me and thanks for your advocacy for small business and anti-Fed stuff and all of the general common sense out there. We need more voices like that.
Well, I practice what I preach, so I'm trying to build my small business up now. Okay, great. Well, thank you again for your time, and I'll put a link to your Twitter too, which is a must follow.
Thank you.